Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where time seems frozen and everything tastes faintly of cabbage and state-issued metal. The air is still, the buildings gray, the future planned in 5-year increments. You're in the Soviet Union, not as a tourist, but as an everyday citizen trying to make it through another perfectly ordinary, soul-numbing day. You wake up to the dull whine of pipes groaning with lukewarm water, if you're lucky. The wallpaper is peeling, the neighbor's radio bleeds through the thin concrete walls, and you're still wrapped in a heavy blanket that smells faintly of boiled laundry and mothballs. Outside your frosted window, the city hums to life in a strangely quiet way. No billboards, no ads, just cold air and long lines. Welcome to the USSR. Your day begins not with choice, but with routine. Everything is regimented, predictable, and slightly absurd. You know what's for breakfast before you open the fridge because there's only one option: kasha. You eat it slowly while staring at a grainy black and white photo of Lenin hanging above the kitchen door. He's always watching, but in a please be productive kind of way. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You head out into the street, your breath visible in the sharp morning chill. The buildings stretch like concrete monoliths mass-produced, unimaginative and somehow comforting. Everything is a dull beige, except for the occasional flash of a red banner proclaiming some vague ideological encouragement. The future belongs to the workers, it says. You're not entirely sure you want it. There's a peculiar quiet in Soviet cities. Cars are rare. Music, when heard, comes from inside open windows or the occasional accordion. There's no buzzing. Neon or store displays yelling for your attention. The state frowns on ostentation. Even your thoughts, sometimes you feel the urge to keep them quiet. The rhythms of life are dictated by centralized planning. Electricity might vanish mid-laundry cycle. Heat might clunk on in July or disappear in February. But everyone shrugs and moves on. It's not personal, it's just the system. You stop by the magazin, which simply means store, but the irony is that it rarely has anything in it. If today's your lucky day, there might be matches or a lone jar of pickles. You don't ask why. You just nod at the babushka behind the counter and say spasibo like you just won the lottery. Historians still argue whether shortages were purely due to mismanagement or partially engineered to keep citizens occupied. You make your way to your assigned job. That word assigned feels heavier than it should. You didn't choose your career. The state chose for you. Maybe you're in a factory or a post office or managing inventory for a factory that no longer really produces anything. It doesn't matter. You show up. That's the main part. The concept of unemployment doesn't really exist. If you don't have a job, you're a parasite, and that label comes with consequences. So even the least motivated worker clocks in. There's a joke. They pretend to pay us. We pretend to work. But it's not told too loudly. Still, there's camaraderie. You sip tea with co-workers, trade favors, and learn the magic of BLAT, the informal network of connections that really keeps the country moving. Want a new winter coat? Better know someone in textiles. Want better meat at the canteen? Know the butcher's cousin. It's not corruption. It's survival with a wink. Your lunch is served on a metal tray. Soup, maybe cabbage-based again, a slice of black bread that could double as a coaster, and a dollop of sour cream if it's a good day. There's always sour cream. It's the duct tape of Soviet cuisine. The afternoon drags. You finish your required quotas, if there are any, and then do the real work, keeping up appearances, dodging bureaucracy, and navigating state gossip. You don't talk politics unless it's safe. And even then, only with people whose eyebrows you've studied for signs of trustworthiness. At the end of the day, the sun has already dipped low. The skyline turns pink against the smog. You walk home past statues of unsmiling men with bronze coats and outstretched arms. Lenin, Gagarin, a vague general who may or may not have actually won a battle. You pass the propaganda board, freshly updated with a poster of a smiling woman holding wheat. You've never looked that happy holding anything, let alone wheat. Home again. The apartment smells of boiled onions. The neighbors are yelling in the hallway, and someone is practicing the balalaika upstairs. You pour a shot of Samagon homemade liquor and settle in. There's a rerun of a war film on TV. You've seen it. They always win, but not everything is gray. There's a beauty in the rhythms, in the resilience, in the way people find joy between the cracks. A wedding toast, a snowy street in silence, a well-worn joke passed down like contraband. And as the radiator clinks to life with one final shudder, you pull your scratchy blanket tight, close your eyes, and remind yourself you made it through another day in the motherland. Your feet echo on the stairs as you climb to the 4th floor of your Khrushchevka, a concrete apartment block built fast and cheap, named for the man who tried to solve the housing crisis by stacking humans like sardines. These buildings are all over the country, 5 stories high, no elevator, of course prefabricated, and held together more by shared discomfort than architecture. Yours is beige, with suspicious streaks running down the facade like tears. Inside your apartment, you're greeted by a familiar chorus, someone's child crying, a neighbor coughing through thin walls, a kettle screeching in unison with an argument 2 doors down. Your unit is officially for a small family, which the state defines generously as up to 7 people, ideally not breathing all at once. You share your space with another family. One room is yours, the other is theirs. The kitchen and bathroom communal, and the hallway an ever-evolving exhibit of shoes, buckets, and drying socks. You learn the dance of cohabitation, how to claim the stove without igniting war, how to time your shower so the hot water hasn't yet run out, and how to not breathe too loudly at 11 p.m. Privacy is a luxury. Your neighbors know everything. When you get up, what you cook, and even what songs you hum while scrubbing potatoes. You try not to speak too freely. Not because they're malicious, most aren't, but because they're exhausted. And when the government encourages constructive reporting, the line between gossip and survival blurs quickly. Historians still argue whether communal living fostered unity or simply institutionalized. Eavesdropping. Your room is small but fiercely yours. A fold-out couch doubles as your bed. A rug hangs on the wall, not for decoration, but insulation. There's a bookshelf with cracked spines, a radio that's more static than sound, and a photograph of your grandmother who once met a real cosmonaut. You glance at the portrait of Lenin above the doorway. You didn't put it there. It came with the room, like the mold in the ceiling dot in the kitchen. You play your part in the delicate ecosystem of shared living. The table is already occupied, so you hover politely, waiting for a spot to peel your potatoes. You measure time by kitchen smells. When someone's soup hits garlic stage, you know you've got 20 minutes until the cue for the sink. Today, you've bartered for a few slices of sausage, real sausage, and a scoop of mustard in a tiny glass jar. You guard it like it's made of rubies. The cockroach makes its appearance at precisely 8:10 p.m., as always. It scuttles across the tile, like it pays rent. You and it have reached a kind of understanding. It lives here too, but it doesn't get a share of the sausage. While you cook, you chat with the mother from the other room. She tells you the rumors someone saw bananas at a store near the train station. A new Western film might be airing next month, heavily edited, of course. And her cousin just got a new washing machine. He knew a guy. You nod, offer her a spoonful of soup, and she returns the favor with a single sugar cube sweetened generosity. Later, you queue for the bathroom. The hallway's dim, lit by a single exposed bulb. The bathroom door creaks like it's haunted. Inside, the sink wobbles and the mirror is fogged from past decades of breath. There's no toilet paper, of course just newspaper, which has a surprising number of political editorials. You glance at the print and think, Khrushchev again, and make sure not to smirk too loudly. Despite all this, there's something oddly endearing about it. The shared hardship, the unspoken agreements, the neighbor who knocks only when she brings stew. It creates a strange intimacy. You may not love it, but you understand it. It's the rhythm of Soviet life, clunky, inconvenient, and wrapped in a scratchy blanket of mutual compromise. The building itself is a living organism. Pipes groan. Radiators clank in protest. The front door doesn't quite close unless you lift it at the right angle. The buzzer has been broken since Brezhnev. Someone wrote "Fix Me" on it in chalk years ago, and now it's just part of the building's personality. You step out onto the tiny balcony, cold metal against your arms. From up here, you see rows of identical buildings stretching into the Chu. Night. Laundry waves gently on lines like tired flags. The sky is blank, the stars mostly hidden by a fog of cold smoke and dreams deferred. Somewhere a radio plays a scratchy love song from the 70s, and for a moment the world softens. There's a joke you hear sometimes. In the West, people live in houses. Here, we live in a system, but you don't laugh at it tonight. You just sip weak tea, wrap yourself tighter in your second-hand sweater, and watch the lights flicker across the Khrushchevka like sleepy fireflies trapped in concrete jars. Tomorrow, you'll try the banana rumor, or maybe you won't. Maybe you'll just stay home, play cards with your neighbor, and discuss how the pipes sound angrier this week. You've learned not to plan too far ahead. Not because of danger, but because the system doesn't reward spontaneity. And yet, beneath the dust, behind the scratched linoleum, in the cracks of shared pots and hallway laughter, there's something. Human still burning here. It's not freedom. Not really, but it's something close enough to keep you warm. You wake early today, but it won't help, because today is a Q day. You didn't plan for it. No one does. It simply happens. A whisper in the stairwell, a rumor passed along from babushka to babushka. They've got sausages at Gum. That's all it takes. You abandon your modest plans, wrap yourself in your heaviest coat, and set out with hope in your chest and emptiness in your stomach. Outside, the air bites. It's not just cold, it's Soviet cold. The kind that sneaks into your boots and settles into your bones. Your breath clouds up in little bursts as you head to the trolleybus stop. It arrives, eventually, groaning and full. You wedge yourself inside, pressed against a man with turnips and a woman holding a plastic bag that may or may not contain actual coffee. The city glides past in monochrome. Everyone moves with the same resigned energy. Not fast, not slow, just enduring. And then, like a mirage, you see it. The line. It snakes out the door of the store and wraps around the building like a sleepy python. Dozens of people, maybe hundreds, and no one knows exactly what they're waiting for. Could be sausage, could be boots, could be that the shop has light bulbs again. The beauty and horror of Soviet lines is that you never truly know until it's your turn. You join the end without asking questions. Asking questions implies weakness. The woman in front of you is knitting. The man behind you is reading Pravda, the official state newspaper, which contains about as much truth as a weather forecast. From Neptune, a boy down the line is selling hot tea from a thermos. You buy a cup. It's weak, bitter, and tastes faintly of aluminum. You love it. Time passes slowly in the queue. You exchange gossip, swap stories, and speculate. Maybe they're selling bananas. Maybe there's a new batch of winter coats from East Germany. Maybe, just maybe, they have real toilet paper. The kind that doesn't come with party slogans printed on it. A woman approaches and asks, "Who's last?" You raise your hand slightly. She nods and repeats the ritual to the person behind her. No one cuts. No one skips. The sanctity of the Soviet line is stronger than any law. After 2 hours, the line hasn't moved. You don't mind. The point of the line isn't always the goods. Sometimes it's the act of queuing. It's social. It's something to do. In a system that denies agency, standing in line gives you purpose. Historians still argue whether queues were an accidental outcome of poor planning or a calculated feature of social control. 3 hours in, a woman with a clipboard emerges from the shop. The collective breath holds. Today we have chicken, legs and soap. A muted groan ripples through the crowd. Not sausage, not bananas, but still soap. You haven't seen it since April. The line begins to move. Glacially, you take small steps forward, each one a victory. By the time you reach the door, your toes are numb and your mood has turned inward. But you're almost there. Inside the store. The lights flicker. The shelves are half empty, manned by a clerk who looks equally empty. You see the soap 2 bars per person. You cradle them like treasure. The chicken legs are nearly gone. You get a small bag, mostly bones and hope. At the register. The clerk doesn't speak. She just stares at a point above your head, as if mentally watching a film of better days. You pay in rubles that feel lighter than they should. and head outside. With your prizzes, the queue outside is still long. Some people won't make it in time. Others will take your place tomorrow, because the queue is eternal. It's the pulse of Soviet consumerism, a system where scarcity becomes ritual. You carry your bag like it contains royal jewels. Back on the trolley bus, the man with turnips eyes your soap with open jealousy. You don't blame him. He probably smells like last month's soup. And honestly, so do you. By the time you reach home, the sun is low. The sky is bruised, pink, and gray. You re-enter your building, climb the stairs, and step back into your shared kingdom. You unwrap one bar of soap, breathe it in, and allow yourself a rare moment of quiet joy. It smells like lemon and old plastic, but mostly it smells like success. Later that evening, you tell your neighbors the tale. They gasp at the soap, marvel at the chicken, and speculate about tomorrow's possibilities. Rumor has it that GUM might get Czech tights next week, or imported Polish jam. You all agree it's worth checking out, just in case the joke goes. In America, people wait for things to happen. In Russia, things happen while you wait. But here in the warmth of your dimly lit apartment, surrounded by chatter and steam from the evening meal, you don't mind the waiting so much. Because in a world where choices are limited and abundance is mythical, the humble queue is more than inconvenience. It's a strange kind of community, a shared hope, a glimpse, however faint, of something better just ahead in line. You wake to the rhythmic banging of pipes and a neighbor's alarm blaring through the wall like a Soviet military parade in miniature. It's another workday, which is to say it's Tuesday or Thursday. Honestly, they blur together because in the USSR, work isn't just a place you go. It's a system you embody, whether you want to or not. You pull on your clothes, a uniform of sorts, not because it's required, but because it's what's clean, and the washing machine is currently broken again. A wrinkled, button-up, wool trousers and boots so worn they could qualify as historical artifacts. You comb your hair with a plastic comb that's cracked in the middle, but still hanging on, like most things in this country. Outside, the air smells of wet brick and factory smoke. You make your way to the bus stop, where the same tired faces shuffle forward in solemn choreography. Everyone knows their part. The ride to work is quiet, except for the squeak of the windshield wipers, and someone whispering that the ministry might shuffle department heads again. You pretend not to hear. In the USSR, pretending not to hear is a survival skill. You work at a textile factory, though it might as well be a typewriter plant or a ministry office or a state-run dairy collective. The experience is broadly similar. You clock in. You nod at Larissa from accounting. You avoid eye contact with Yuri, who's always angry for reasons no one knows. And then you proceed to your station, where you pretend to be useful. The machines hum. The air is thick with lint and silence. The foreman strolls by occasionally, mostly to appear busy himself. There's an unspoken agreement here. You don't push too hard, and neither will the system. Productivity isn't measured by output, it's measured by conformity. Historians still argue whether the Soviet workplace was a tool for economic control or simply a staging ground for elaborate, state-funded pantomimes. You stitch fabric for a while. Then someone breaks the rhythm tea break. There's always a tea break. You gather in the break room, which smells faintly of cabbage and heavy bureaucracy. Someone's brought jam. Someone else shares a crumbling biscuit. You talk about television, yesterday's newsreel, which showed tractors and smiling workers, and whether they'll ever install better lighting in the stairwell. Spoiler, they won't dot at some point. You return to your station, not because you're inspired, but because someone higher up might walk through. Occasionally, they do a party member in a bad suit, inspecting the troops. You straighten your posture, smile a little too wide, and nod when they talk about meeting quotas or fulfilling the 5-year plan. You nod harder if they use the phrase exceeding expectations. The quotas themselves, arbitrary. The factory once produced 10,000 bolts of fabric in a week on paper. In reality, most of them were too short or uneven or didn't arrive at all. But the numbers looked good, and that was enough. Someone made a banner. It's still hanging in the lobby. There's a classic Soviet anecdote. We pretend to work, and they pretend to pay us. It's funny because it's true. Your salary comes like clockwork, but it's barely enough to live on. So you do what everyone does, you trade. Some fabric here, a little vodka there, maybe a set of children's boots from that guy who knows someone at the port. The shadow economy, or tenovaya economica, isn't so shadowy. It's just life. By afternoon, the factory grows quieter. Not because the work is done, but because the enthusiasm has evaporated. You take longer tea breaks. Maybe someone starts a chess game. Maybe you sneak out early, walking backward down the hallway in case the foreman looks out his window. He won't, but still. Back outside, the air tastes like metal and dry leaves. You breathe in deeply, not because it's fresh, but because it's yours. You stop by a friend's apartment. He works at a nearby plant and smuggled out a small radio part that could help you fix your cassette player. You swap it for 2 jars of pickled cucumbers and a tin of Bulgarian shaving cream. Everyone wins. The evening is yours, sort of. You try not to think about tomorrow, even though it will be identical. There's something oddly calming about the sameness. No surprises, no ambition, just the steady thrum of managed expectations. Your uncle used to tell you stories of when he really worked back in the 50s, when factories buzzed with purpose and people believed in progress, or pretended harder. You're not sure. Now, no one asks why you do what you do. They just hope the heat works through the winter. Dinner tonight is mashed potatoes, a piece of sausage from your earlier victory queue, and bread that's gone. Slightly stiff, but still heroic in its determination to be edible. You listen to the radio, a comedy show that's not particularly funny, but the laugh track is enthusiastic. Then, with the lights dimmed and your shoulders loose from a shot of something strong, you settle into your worn armchair. The radiator hisses like an old man with secrets. The walls creak. You close your eyes and think. You went to work. You returned, and you kept your head low. That's success. And in the quiet warmth of your tiny apartment, under the gaze of a crooked Lenin pin on the shelf, you almost feel proud, because in the USSR, the work isn't the point. It's the showing up, the enduring, the ability to keep moving slowly, sideways, sometimes in circles, but always forward. or at least convincingly enough. You're 8 years old now. You still live in the same Khrushchevka, of course, only now everything seems taller and louder and occasionally more magical. The hallway light flickers just like always. The stairs still smell like old soup and wet socks, but to you, it's all part of the adventure. Welcome to childhood in the USSR. Your mornings begin early, with your mother bundling you up in a woolen scarf so large you temporarily lose peripheral vision. She buttons your coat all the way to the top, pulls the hat down over your ears, and then hands you a dented tin lunchbox that smells permanently of boiled eggs. You complain mildly. She replies with a raised eyebrow, a universal warning that transcends ideology. Your school is a short walk away, past rows of nearly identical buildings and a statue of Lenin that you started to wave to out of habit. The schoolyard is bare. No jungle gyms or soft mats, just cracked asphalt and the occasional puddle, frozen into a glassy trap of doom for unsuspecting children. Inside, you join a line of other bundled, sniffling kids. Everyone hangs up their coats, lines up, and prepares to recite the morning pledge. You all repeat it in unison, something about being honest, strong, and loving the motherland more than your own future. You mouth the words slightly out of sync, more focused on the snack you hope is tucked somewhere in your lunchbox. The classroom smells like wet mittens and chalk. Your teacher, Comrade Yelena Ivanovna, is kind but stern. Her eyebrows are magnificent twin scimitars of authority. She speaks softly, but every child listens. The punishments are mild loss of recess, an extra essay, but the real fear is public disappointment. In the USSR, shame is communal. Your subjects are predictable. Math, Russian, language, history, especially that one. In history class, you learn about the glories of the October Revolution, the heroism of wartime mothers, and the unquestionable genius of Lenin. Stalin appears too, briefly and carefully. Historians still argue whether his later erasure from children's textbooks was more confusing or comforting. During breaks, you play games like Kazaki Razboyniki Cops and Robbers, with ideological overtones, or Klasiki, which is basically Soviet hopscotch, played on broken pavement with a rock that's slightly less jagged than the others. If you're lucky, someone has chewing gum, a mythical treat usually traded from a sailor's cousin's cousin who once went to Bulgaria. Your favorite toy isn't really a toy. It's a small tin soldier, missing one arm, which you've named Victor. You build bunkers for him in the sandbox, make him fight against fascist bottle caps, and whisper secret orders into his remaining ear. You don't have Barbie dolls or action figures. You have repurposed spoons and great imagination. Back at home, your entertainment options are limited. There's television, of course, 2 channels. 3, if you count the static-filled Kazakh one that only works on Tuesdays. Your favorite show is new, Pagodi, where a chain-smoking wolf in bell-bottoms repeatedly fails to catch an annoyingly smug rabbit. It's Soviet Tom and Jerry, but with more moral lessons and fewer explosions. You sing along to patriotic songs, half ironically. One is about a tractor. Another is about a boy named Pavlik, who denounced his father for anti-revolutionary thoughts. You're told this is the highest form of loyalty. You find it confusing. Also, Pavlik seems kind of mean. Bath time is a whole family operation. The water heater is unreliable, so the tub is filled with pots of boiled water and guesswork. You sit in the tub while your mother scrubs your ears with terrifying efficiency. The soap stings a little, and you pretend you don't care. Afterward, you're wrapped in a towel that used to be white, dried by a towel that never was, and tucked into bed before the radiator starts its midnight hissing dot. Your bedtime book isn't a fairy tale. It's a state-approved children's reader filled with parables about obedience, industry, and occasionally hedgehogs. You like the hedgehogs. They're the only characters who seem genuinely happy. One day you get sick. A fever. Your mother takes you to the clinic, where you sit for hours beneath portraits of party heroes. The doctor finally calls your name, listens to your chest, and prescribes warm milk, black bread, and a compress. You're not sure what a compress is, but it's always part of the prescription. You begin to suspect the Soviet medical system is run by compresses. At home, the neighbor brings you a hand-me-down book. It's about space. Gagarin features heavily. You stare at the glossy photo of him smiling in his helmet and feel something stir in your chest. Not ambition exactly, more like a quiet admiration for someone who got to leave. You once asked your grandfather what it was like before all this. He smiles a sad smile and says nothing. Then he gives you a spoonful of jam, which means the subject is closed. Later that evening, you and the other kids gather in the stairwell. Someone has found a real soccer ball, not made of tape and rags, but actual leather. The rules don't matter. The game lasts until someone cries, which usually takes less than 10 minutes as you lie in bed that night, curled under a blanket. Heavy enough to pin a small bear, you think of Victor the tin soldier and Gagarin the spaceman. One is missing an arm. The other is missing gravity. You wonder which is freer. The truth is, Soviet childhood is a strange blend of structure and scarcity, creativity, and control. You don't realize it's unusual, because to you, it's just normal. There are rules, but also moments of wild joy. There's silence, but also laughter and stairwells. There's surveillance, yes, but also snowball fights that feel like tiny revolutions. You close your eyes, warm and full of soup, and drift into dreams where Victor finally wins his battle. Not because he's brave, but because he just keeps showing up. You're older now, 10, maybe 12, and the classroom feels tighter. Not because the walls have moved, but because the lessons have. The tone shifts. The smiles are thinner. The textbook's heavier with meaning. You've entered the serious phase of your Soviet schooling, and with it comes a quiet pressure you can't quite name. Each day begins the same. You line up with your classmates, stiff in your forma, the brown school uniform with its regulation collar and uncomfortable buttons. On celebration days, the girls wear starched white aprons and pigtails tied with massive bows. You don't understand why the bows are so big. It's like they're trying to levitate. A red Pioneersky Galstuck or Pioneer necktie is draped carefully around your neck, tied just right. Not too loose, not too tight. You've been taught how to fold it precisely triangular, sharp, no wrinkles. It's not just fabric, it's your badge of belonging. And heaven help the child who forgets theirs at home. That's a talk with the teacher, and maybe the director, and definitely your parents. School starts with the anthem. Everyone stands, hands to sides, eyes forward. You mumble the words like everyone else, hoping no one notices that you replaced Lenin with lemon just to amuse yourself. You don't laugh, you wouldn't dare. You just think it, and that's rebellion enough. In class, the material gets denser. Math is straightforward. Soviets love precision. Science is mostly physics and chemistry. No mention of Western discoveries, unless it's to scoff. History, though, is where things get murky. You're taught a story with clear heroes and villains. The West is always suspicious. The party is always right. Stalin is complicated. Historians still argue whether his gradual reappearance in lesson plans was a sign of nostalgia or just selective amnesia. You write essays with titles like Why? I Love My Motherland and the Heroism of the October Revolution. You learn to use certain phrases that make teachers nod. According to Marxist-Leninist principles, the glory of labor, and guided by the party's wise leadership. The words feel heavy in your mouth, like overcooked dumplings. There's no talk of the gulag, of purges, of bread riots in Leningrad. That history is buried deep and with intent. You feel its outline sometimes, like a body hidden beneath floorboards. But officially, everything is fine. More than fine, glorious. You sit through long hours at your desk, which is shared with a classmate whose elbow always finds your side. The ink in your pen smudges. The paper is thin and smells faintly of cabbage and state supply rooms. You draw little tanks in the margins, sometimes with smiley faces. Not for fun, just so the teacher thinks you're paying attention. There's physical education too, of course. Outside in the snow, you do squats and run drills in ill-fitting shoes. You're taught to march properly, how to hold a flag, how to throw a rubber grenade. Training for a future that everyone says is peaceful, but never stops preparing for war. The school motto painted above the gym reads, "Prepare for labor and defense." You read it daily, wondering which one is scarier. Religion is not spoken of. Officially, it doesn't exist. The Soviet Union is proudly atheist. God is not in the curriculum. But you've seen your grandmother cross herself quietly at night, and once a boy was expelled for wearing a small cross. You never saw him again. You learn quickly which questions not to ask. After school, you go to pioneer meetings. They're like a mix between scouts and soft propaganda workshops. You learn how to bandage a wound, sing songs about tractors, and salute with purpose. Sometimes you clean up a local park under the watchful eye of a supervisor who makes everything feel vaguely like a military operation. At home, your parents ask how school was. You shrug. You've learned not to speak too openly, not because they don't love you, but because they do. And protection in the USSR often means silence. You mention a teacher who made a strange face when someone misquoted Lenin. Your father changes the subject. Your mother offers second helpings. Your textbooks are state-issued. Their covers are red or brown. The pages occasionally list quotes in bold. There is no fortress the Bolsheviks cannot storm. Or, under socialism, man becomes truly free. You write these in your notebook, sometimes backwards, just to feel like you're doing something mischievous. There's a school club for chess, another for singing patriotic ballads. You're part of neither. You and your friends prefer the art room, where you draw castles and dragons and once, daringly, a television. Your teacher frowns, tears it up, and assigns a new topic, the heroism of the worker. You draw a guy holding a wrench. He has a cape. One day, a girl in your class asks what capitalism is. She gets detention. Later, she tells you in the hallway that her uncle has American jeans. He got them in Poland. You've never seen American jeans. You picture them glowing dot later that month. You write a poem about a tractor. It wins a small certificate that smells like ink and mildew. You bring it home. Your parents smile a bit too wide. It goes on the wall, next to the painting of the Kremlin, next to the clock that always runs 5 minutes slow dot at night. You lie in bed and recite the names of cities you've never seen. Minsk, Tashkent, Vladivostok. You imagine they're just like yours, concrete, quiet, filled with kids staring at ceilings, wondering if anyone else is wondering. Two dot in Soviet school. You learn a lot math, sure, and spelling, but mostly you learn the art of dual thought. One face for the teacher, one for your friends, one mind for the party, another, small and secret, for yourself. You grow fluent in careful nods and silent questions, and when you graduate, you'll wear a sash and hold balloons and shout pre-approved slogans. And deep inside, in the part of your brain that still draws dragons and thinks about American jeans, you'll wonder, what else is out there? You open the fridge. It makes a noise like it's in pain. Inside, a lonely jar of pickled mushrooms, a half brick of processed cheese, one dried beet, and something unidentifiable that you might have once called meat. Dinner is going to be imaginative. Again, welcome to food in the Soviet Union, where every meal is part cooking, part treasure hunt, and part negotiation with physics. You begin by boiling water. This is step one of all Soviet recipes. Doesn't matter what you're making, boil water. You peel a potato. It's a good one, only 2 black spots. You mash it with the back of a spoon, add a pinch of salt, and pretend it's from a fine restaurant in Paris. You've never been to Paris, of course, but you've seen pictures. It has bread. If you're lucky, you have tushonka canned meat. It's greasy, gelatinous, and smells like something that should be classified, but it fills you up. Mix it with pasta and boom, Soviet spaghetti. You even sprinkle breadcrumbs on top for a garnish. Classy. But most days it's soup. Shi if you have cabbage. Borscht if you have beets. Okroshka if it's summer and your fridge has given up. Every soup starts with a broth if you can call boiled bones and onion skins a broth. Still, it's warm. And in the Soviet climate, that's half the battle. You eat with black bread, chewy, dense and vaguely floral if it's fresh, vaguely. Brick-like if it's not. There's always black bread, even when there's nothing else. There's a joke that if the world ended tomorrow, Soviet citizens would still find a way to serve it with black bread and tea. Speaking of tea, it's not just a drink, it's a ritual. You drink it constantly. With sugar, without sugar, with lemon if you've got friends in high places. You sip it from thick, faceted glasses inside metal holders that burn your hands and your lips, but feel elegant anyway. Someone always offers jam, uzik, on the side to sweeten the experience when there's no candy in the house. You nibble it slowly off a spoon like royalty on rations. Dessert? Well, there's zephyr, if you can find it, like a marshmallow's older Soviet cousin. Or Verenu homemade jam that doubles as medicine, dessert, and bribe. Sometimes your neighbor gifts you honey in a reused mustard jar. Sometimes you trade 3 eggs for someone's extra apple. It's not cuisine, it's just that, and when holidays come, that's when you really pull out the stops. New Year's is the culinary Super Bowl. You make Olivier salad, a strange miracle of boiled potatoes, carrots, pickles, peas, eggs, and mayonnaise. It looks like something your dog might regret eating, but it's the crown jewel of every celebration. Each family guards their recipe like state secrets. The fringe detail? The original recipe included crayfish tails and grouse. Today it includes hope and optimism. You also serve herring under a fur coat. It's exactly what it sounds like. Layers of salted fish, potatoes, beets, and mayonnaise in a gelatinous rainbow stack that you either adore or fear. Historians still argue whether this dish was an act of defiance or just the result of a refrigerator dare. There are sausages, rare and precious, pickles, of course, cucumbers in vinegar, tomatoes in brine, even apples soaked in mystery liquid that taste oddly fizzy. You don't ask why. You just eat them. Every dish has a backstory. Every plate carries memories. That jam? From berries your aunt foraged last summer. The compote? Made from dried apples your mother sliced in 1979. That beet salad? From a neighbor who owed you for babysitting. Shopping for ingredients is never easy. You visit 3 or 4 gastronom stores, stand in line for hours, and leave with whatever they happen to be selling that day. Bananas? You saw those once, in 1986, for about 20 minutes. The man who got the last bunch still talks about it like it was a religious experience. Sometimes imported goods appear: Polish ketchup, Finnish chocolate, Cuban oranges. These are miracles. You hide them at the back of the cupboard, wrapped in plastic, reserved for weddings, funerals, or when someone visits from Moscow. But most of the time, it's basics, and not always the good kind. Milk arrives in bags, often sour. Eggs are seasonal. Sugar is rationed. You learn to adapt. You make pancakes with carbonated water to give them lift. You use vinegar to stretch mayonnaise. You reheat yesterday's soup and call it improved. Still, there's pride. A well-set Soviet table is a point of honor, a creative triumph, a small middle finger to scarcity. You lay down the best linens, use the finest china, the kind with a gold rim that chips if you look at it too hard. The food might be simple, but it's arranged like a royal banquet, because guests deserve beauty. Even if that beauty tastes like boiled carrot. You remember your grandmother's secret stash, a bottle of Georgian wine, a tin of condensed milk, a chocolate bar from 1982. These are treasures. You hold on to them not just because they're rare, but because they remind you of sweetness, of generosity, of home. Late at night, you tiptoe into the kitchen. There's half a cucumber, some rye, a spoonful of jam. You assemble your midnight feast and eat by the window, watching the snow fall past. The flickering street light. It's quiet, still. The world outside may be gray and slow, but in this moment, with your little bite of sweet and sour, you feel something close to comfort. Soviet food isn't about taste. It's about memory, about making do, about the strange magic of turning nothing into just enough. And tonight, that's exactly what you have. You stand in front of the mirror, holding a pair of pants that could also double as a tent. The fabric is stiff, the color is somewhere between gray and mustard, and there's a faint smell of vinegar that no amount of washing has ever defeated. It's fashion Soviet style, which is to say, function first, flair never. You've never been to a mall. The concept doesn't exist. Instead, you shop at the Univerm Ag Estate department store that's part showroom, part museum, and part endurance trial. Racks are sparse, choices are minimal. Want a new shirt? Great, you can have this one, this exact one, in this exact size. That is, if you know the sales lady's cousin or happen to be in the store the moment the new stock arrives, you pull on the pants. They make a whispering noise as you move, like they're plotting something. The fit is wrong in several dimensions, but with a belt and some creative tucking, they'll do. Your jacket, meanwhile, is quilted olive green and shaped like a refrigerator. You're warm, yes, but also indistinguishable from everyone else on the street. Soviet fashion is uniform not because people lack style, but because style requires access. And access is ... tricky. Officially, clothes are distributed through the state. Unofficially, you get the good stuff through Blatt, the informal network of favors and connections that everyone swears doesn't exist. Historians still argue whether Blatt was a symptom of systemic failure or the very thing that kept the system from collapsing. There are fashion magazines, like Journal Mode, but they're more aspirational than achievable. Models stare out from glossy pages wearing outfits that might exist only in theory. You clip pictures, hand them to your aunt, and she tries her best on the sewing machine, hunched over in the kitchen, making dreams out of curtains and leftover lining from a winter coat. Speaking of coats, they're a whole category unto themselves. A proper Soviet winter coat weighs approximately as much as a baby bear. It's bulky, heavy, and impervious to wind. It also guarantees you'll knock over at least one object every time you enter a room. The fringe detail? You often share that coat with your sibling, alternating days. It's less his and hers, and more first shift, second shift. Shoes? Now that's an odyssey. Soviet shoes are made for endurance, not elegance. Leather is scarce, so many are made of faux materials with the flexibility of a roof tile. You break them in by walking awkwardly and swearing quietly. Or you? Go to the shoemaker if you can find one who still has soles. There was once a craze for check boots. Sleek, black, almost Western. A friend of a friend smuggled a pair in. He was treated like royalty for a week, and then promptly stepped in slush, ruining them forever. A tragedy. Truly. In summer, you wear sandals, usually plastic, sometimes rubber. They're uncomfortable, but at least they don't pretend to be something they're not. And they dry quickly, which is useful when your building's plumbing decides to reroute itself through your hallway again. On your head, a hat, always a hat. A shapka in winter, usually made of faux fur that makes a loud squish when wet. In spring and fall, a knitted beanie. And in summer, a cap that makes you look like you wandered off a tractor. Which, fashion-wise, you sort of have. You remember being jealous of a kid who had jeans. Real ones, from Levi's, smuggled in through East Germany. He wore them every day for 3 months, even to bed. You could hear them crack when he moved, but oh, the envy, the mystique, the westernness of it all. For most people, sewing is a survival skill. You learn to patch, Demand 2. Repurpose. A dress becomes a skirt. A shirt becomes a pillowcase. Nothing is wasted. Your grandmother has a drawer of buttons that spans 4 generations. You once made a necklace out of them and felt like royalty. You go to school dressed exactly like your classmates. Same brown. Uniform, same satchel, same worn shoes. But each of you tries to sneak in personality. A pin, a ribbon, a funny patch sewn on the inside lining. Little rebellions stitched beneath the surface. There are special outfits, too, for holidays, for pioneer parades, for weddings. They come out of storage smelling like mothballs in ceremony. You treat them like relics. Your aunt's wedding dress is made of white synthetic fabric that reflects light in a way that says noble glare rather than bridal glow. But it's still beautiful in a stubborn, this is what we have sort of way. Perfume? If you're lucky, you have a bottle of Krasnaya Moskva, red Moscow. It smells like rose water, amber, and subtle regret. One spritz lasts all day and possibly into the next. Men wear Choinoi eau de cologne triple cologne, also useful as a disinfectant, mosquito repellent, or mild explosive. Accessories are few. A. Scarf here, a watch there. The watch probably doesn't work, but it looks like it might, and that's enough. Belts are shared. Gloves are mismatched. And handbags? If you have one, guard it like state secrets. Despite all this, or maybe because of it, fashion becomes a quiet form of resistance. You iron your shirt not because it's required, but because pride lives in pressed seams. You starch a collar, polish your boots, curl your hair with borrowed rollers. You find ways to feel good despite the options, not because of them. And sometimes, in the privacy of your room, you imagine what you'd wear if you could choose anything. Maybe a leather jacket, maybe a skirt that twirls, maybe just jeans that bend when you walk. But until then, you walk the streets in your quilted armor, head high, scarf knotted just so. You look like everyone else, but inside you're a masterpiece of improvisation. You lock eyes across a room. It's not dramatic, not cinematic. No violins swell. There's no candlelight. Just fluorescent bulbs buzzing overhead, casting a pale yellow glow over plates of pickled things. But still something stirs. A glance, a twitch of a smile. And suddenly romance blooms in the least romantic place imaginable, the Soviet Union. Dating here is a strange dance. There's no Tinder, no texting, no meeting for coffee. You ask someone out the old-fashioned way, awkwardly, in person, while pretending it's not a big deal. You invite them to walk. Just walk around the neighborhood, past the Lenin Monument, around the puddle that never dries. If you're feeling bold, you buy a flower. A single one, usually a carnation, slightly wilted but full of intent. You hold it behind your back, casually, like it's a state secret. When you offer it, you do so without fanfare. Too much emotion is frowned upon. Too little, and she might think you're not serious. You find the exact middle, which is essentially the Soviet Union's official policy on everything. Your first date might be a park, bench, and half a bottle of kefir. Or a movie at the local cinema, if you can find one playing something remotely romantic. There's a chance it's a war film. There's always a war film. Still, you hold hands during the loud parts. and pretend not to care that the man next to you is chewing dried fish. In the USSR, love is a serious business. It's practical. It's immediate. You don't see where things go. You go straight to, are you ready to be married, have children, and share one room with my aunt and possibly a goat? Flirting is done through implication. A shared seat on the trolley bus. A slightly longer pause when handing over a cup of tea. An eyebrow raised in exactly the right tone. You learn to read the silences because the system doesn't really allow loud declarations, and yet love persists. Weddings are a blend of bureaucracy and vodka. First, you book a slot at the ZAGS, the State Marriage Registry. It's not a church. That's still frowned upon, and it's not a chapel. It's a government office with beige walls, a chandelier, and a portrait of Lenin solemnly witnessing your union. You arrive with your witnesses, your family, and your cake, always a cake. The bride wears a dress that's often borrowed, rented, or handmade from synthetic fabric that reflects light like an emergency blanket. The groom wears a suit that fits badly, but proudly. Everyone's hair is lacquered into submission. You sign papers, stand in the right places, and listen as an official reads a pre-written speech about loyalty, contribution to the state, and harmonious household management. It's weirdly clinical. But then someone cries, and then someone else opens a bottle of Champanskoye Soviet champagne, sweet as syrup and twice as explosive, and the celebration begins. The reception takes place in a community hall, or someone's apartment if you're short on favors. There's food. Mountains of Olivier salad, pickled mushrooms, cold cuts, and bread. There's music, accordion, maybe a cassette player, and toasts. So many toasts. To love, to the future. To the Soviet Union, which gave us this moment. Mandatory. And, of course, to the mother-in-law, may she visit rarely and speak gently. The fringe fact? There are actual wedding inspectors. Bureaucrats who might drop by to ensure you're not engaging in any anti-state celebratory behavior. No Elvis impersonators allowed. After the cake, the bride throws her bouquet. It hits a ceiling fan. Someone cheers anyway. Then the dancing begins, awkward, stompy, sincere. People sweat through their shirts and don't care. You find your new spouse's hand in the crowd and think, yes, this is mine now. The honeymoon, if it happens at all, is modest. A trip to Sochi, maybe, if you manage to snag a vacation voucher from your workplace. Or you spend a weekend at a dacha, a country cottage with an outhouse and a view of turnips. You boil potatoes, swat mosquitoes, and discover that romance thrives when both people are covered in bug bites and smelling faintly of smoke. Marriage in the USSR isn't always easy. Housing is tight. Privacy is theoretical. You might wait 10 years for your own apartment. Until then, you live within laws. You share a kitchen with your spouse's second cousin. You argue over boiled water, jam rationing, and whose turn it is to wait in line for eggs. But you also laugh. You share secrets whispered under heavy blankets. You learn how to stretch a budget and a recipe in a moment. You celebrate small victories, a new tablecloth, a working radio, a night without guests. Children come quickly. Or not. Either way, the state has opinions. You receive a certificate, a medal even, for having a third child. Motherhood is considered a contribution to the state. You get time off work, access to extra food rations, and a stroller that squeaks like a submarine. Romantic anniversaries are celebrated with boiled chicken and a single candle, because who has electricity all the time? You give handmade gifts, a poem, a scarf, a mixtape with Western music you probably shouldn't own. You write their name in cursive across your notebook, hidden behind math problems. Love, like everything else here, requires patience and resilience. And humor, you don't always get flowers, but you get warmth. You don't always get poetry, but you get loyalty. You don't always get privacy, but you get a partner who knows just how to make the tea when the day has been long. And sometimes, when the samovar is bubbling and the snow is tapping softly on the window, you catch your partner's eye across the room and you remember the first look, the first walk, the carnation that wilted in your coat pocket. And you smile, not big, just enough. You sit cross-legged on the floor, fiddling with the dials of your radio. It's a bulky, dusty box that hums with static and secrets. You twist the knob ever so gently, CRKKK, and there, in the fuzz, a whisper of jazz. Real jazz, American, forbiddens. You lean closer, holding your breath like you've cracked open a vault of contraband dreams. Listening to Western music in the USSR isn't a hobby. It's a calculated risk. Officially, there's no censorship in the Soviet Union. Unofficially, every radio wave, magazine page, and microphone is monitored, controlled, shaped. And if you're caught tuning into the Voice of America or BBC Russian service, well, let's just say it's strongly discouraged. You turn the volume down to a murmur, barely audible. It's not just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting the people around you. If your neighbor hears it, they might feel obligated to report you. Or maybe not. But the possibility hangs in the air like invisible smoke. The walls, after all, have ears. So do the telephones. You've long since accepted that every call might be listened to. Every letter steamed open, every sentence analyzed for treasonous. Verbs. There's even a term for this invisible eye. The organs, a deliberately vague word that somehow feels creepier than the full name of the KGB. Your friend once joked, the KGB doesn't eavesdrop. It participates. You both laughed, quietly. And then you erased the joke from your notebooks, just in case. But still, you seek out the West, its music, its movies, its whisper of color in your otherwise sepia-toned world. A cousin of yours knows someone who owns a bootlegged Beatles tape, copied so many times that Paul McCartney now sounds like he's singing from inside a washing machine. Doesn't matter. You treasure it. You memorize the lyrics phonetically, having no idea what half the words mean. And then there's Samizdat, the underground press. Books, poems, even jokes typed and retyped, passed from hand to hand like sacred artifacts. Someone brings you a faded carbon copy of Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago. It's missing pages and smells faintly of onions, but you read it like scripture. Each line feels electric. There's danger in this, of course. Real danger. The fringe detail? Possessing certain banned books or recordings isn't just frowned upon. It can get you expelled, demoted, even imprisoned. Historians still argue whether the cultural underground was a revolution in slow motion, or merely a pressure valve to keep the system from rupturing outright. But repression doesn't stop curiosity. It only gives it sharper teeth. You once attended a clandestine poetry reading. Someone's apartment, third floor, blackout curtains drawn tight. You sat on the floor with 20 others, sipping weak tea and listening to verses about freedom, disguised as metaphors about snow. No one clapped, you just nodded. That was enough. Art becomes coded. Songs hint at forbidden loves. Films tell one story on the surface and another in the shadows. Even children's cartoons slip in subtle satire. You watch the hedgehog in the fog and wonder, years later, whether the fog wasn't just fog, but the system watches back. Censors exist. Blue pencil editors whose job is to scrub nuance from books, to delete entire scenes from imported films, to ensure that no character questions too loudly. You once saw a Western movie where an entire subplot had been sliced out, leaving a gap so wide that the characters jumped from dating to divorce with no explanation. You never ask why. Even typewriters are registered. Every machine has a unique print signature logged by the state. So if someone circulates an unauthorized leaflet, they can trace it. You think of this every time you see your mother tap out a recipe. You wonder if the state really cares about beet salad. Then again, maybe it does. TV is safer, but blander. You watch endless newsreels about industrial output, heroic miners, and the occasional grumpy diplomat from abroad. If a Western politician is shown, it's without subtitles. You're not supposed to understand them, just to notice their weak chins and the way their suits don't fit right. You laugh anyway. Their suits are way better than yours. Once, late at night, you catch a glimpse of a Western ad on a scrambled signal. Bright colors, shiny packaging. A woman smiling with her teeth. You stare, mesmerized. You can't remember the product. You just remember the want. Of course, not everyone is curious. Many people are content, or they appear to be. They play state-approved records. They sing along to patriotic ballads. They read Pravda and quote it at dinner. Maybe they believe it. Maybe they're afraid not to. Maybe it's just easier. You, though, can't stop tuning that dial. One day, someone mentions the van. It parks near the apartment blocks sometimes. No markings, just sits there. People say it intercepts illegal broadcasts. You laugh nervously. You were sure that was just a joke. Then you see it, sitting 2 streets down, engine off, windows dark. You pretend not to notice, but that night you skip the radio. Instead, you take out your notebook and draw. A city you've never seen. Bright lights, no cues. People wearing jeans. You know it's not real, but it helps, because censorship doesn't just erase. It reshapes reality. It teaches you to read between lines, to speak in code, to think in whispers. And in doing so, it creates something it never intended. A generation fluent in silence, but fluent. Still, you go to sleep that night with the radio under your bed, tuned to static, just in case. Tomorrow, maybe, the jazz will come through again. And when it does, you'll be there, listening, always listening. You stretch your legs out on a splintered bench that smells faintly of sun-warmed varnish and years of boiled eggs. Around you, pigeons, distant accordion music, and a group of pensioners arguing with theatrical vigor over a chessboard. It's your day off, and like millions of other Soviet citizens, You're attempting the impossible leisure dot in a system where everything is planned. Relaxation is no exception. The state provides official avenues for fun, clubs, cultural centers, parades, and sanitary state-run health resorts, where you go not to party, but to rest under strict supervision. Your workplace has assigned you a voucher to one such sanatorium. You didn't choose the location, or the dates, or the activities. But here you are, packed into a long train ride with 30 strangers, half of whom are already wearing socks with sandals and clutching thermoses like relics from a sacred rite. The sanatorium is located near a forest, or what used to be a forest before half of it was cleared for expansion. The building is a mix of concrete slabs and faded optimism, with posters in the lobby declaring, "Rest is the foundation of labor," in red blocky letters. You check into a dormitory-style room with peeling walls, a shared shower, and a pillow. That feels like it's stuffed with damp hay. Still, there are perks. There's a medical wing where you receive mandatory relaxation therapy, electromagnetic mud baths, mineral water ingestion, possibly a radon inhalation tent if you're lucky. You can also sign up for therapeutic walking, which sounds peaceful, but is actually a highly regimented hike led by a nurse in orthopedic shoes and a whistle. The food? Predictable. Breakfast is semolina porridge. Lunch is soup, buckwheat, and a cutlet that might be meat adjacent. Dinner is tea and something pickled. Always something pickled. You spend afternoons in the common room, reading state-approved novels or playing dominoes with a man who was once, allegedly, a colonel. He tells wild stories about parachuting into East Germany with only a map, a pistol, and 3 tins of sardines. You nod respectfully and try not to ask questions that could be interpreted as impolite curiosity. There are group events too, mandatory ones, folk dancing, singing circles, patriotic film screenings. You attend them all, clapping when it's expected and laughing when everyone else does. The goal is not individual expression, it's shared participation. Historians still argue whether this collective leisure was an effective tool for solidarity, or just an unusually cheerful form of surveillance. And yet, it's not all bad. The air is fresh. The pine trees are lovely. You find yourself exhaling more deeply, walking a little slower, noticing birds you'd usually ignore. One day you wake up early and walk alone to the lake. There's mist on the water. The silence feels ancient. And for a few minutes you forget that your room smells like cabbage, and your shoes never quite dried. Back in the city, leisure takes different forms. If you have a dacha, a summer cottage, you spend weekends there growing potatoes, swatting mosquitoes, and boiling tea over a portable stove. You pretend you're getting away, but you still line up at the village store and still listen to the same state radio. You visit parks. Soviet parks are curated experiences. Wide boulevards, heroic statues, a carousel that creaks with quiet despair. You rent a paddle boat and glide in slow, uneven circles on a man-made pond. Children shriek. Old men play Damra guitars. Somewhere a woman sells sunflower seeds and rolled-up newspaper cones. Sometimes you attend a sabbatnik, a volunteer community work day. Yes, even free time involves work. You sweep courtyards, plant flowers, repaint fences. It's technically optional, but in the USSR, optional is a flexible concept. You smile for the group photo, room in hand, wondering why relaxing always involves so much paint. At home, relaxation means state TV. You stretch out on your scratchy couch, sipping weak tea, watching a nature documentary about beavers. That slowly morphs into a lesson on socialist perseverance. Later, there's a musical variety show, then a film where tractors fall in love. You don't fully follow the plot, but the soundtrack is nice. Books are a staple of leisure. If you're lucky enough to own a full bookshelf, it's a source of pride. You reread the same volumes over and over, Pushkin, Gorky, maybe even Bulgakov if you've managed to hide that copy. You trade books with friends. You discuss them in hushed tones. You memorize poems just in case someone asks for one at a gathering. And there are gatherings, birthdays, name days, random Tuesdays. Someone brings a bottle of Samagon, someone else brings an accordion, and for a few hours, everything softens. You sing, laugh, share a single sausage among 6 people, and remember that joy isn't rationed, just quietly defiant. Leisure in the Soviet Union is never truly passive. It's shaped, structured, and watched. You fill out forms for vacation. You submit essays about what the youth collective did over the summer. Even your hobbies, wood carving, chess, embroidery, are filtered through clubs with official approval. And yet, within these borders, there's room. Room to breathe, to joke, to build things that aren't strictly necessary, to care about how your cucumbers are pickling, or whether your tomatoes have enough sun. You lie on your back in the grass behind the sanatorium, arms out, staring at the sky. No planes, no ads, just clouds drifting slowly across a pale blue canvas. You think about nothing, or maybe everything. You realize you've gone hours without checking a scheduled dot, and for a moment, you feel something that just might be freedom. The church stands crooked at the edge of a forest, half swallowed by trees and time. Its onion dome is rusted, its cross barely visible under layers of lichen. No bells ring here anymore. No choirs sing. Yet early on Sunday morning, you see someone slip through the side door, coat buttoned tight, eyes low. Another follows, then a third. Quiet as Miss Dot in the USSR, religion never truly disappears. It just goes underground. Officially, the state is secular. Militant atheism is not just encouraged, it's policy. From the 1920s onward, churches were closed, icons smashed, clergy arrested or re-educated. Cathedrals became storage warehouses, museums, or swimming pools. Faith, they said, belonged to the past. Progress had no need for miracles. And yet, people still cross themselves before travel, still light candles for the dead, still whisper prayers under breath when the power goes out and the wind howls a little too long. The body of faith may have been banished, but its bones remain. Your grandmother keeps an icon hidden in the back of a cupboard, behind jars of cherry compote. It's old, the paint flaking, the Virgin's eyes a little smudged. She lights a match, not a proper candle, and places it in a bottle cap. She mutters something, half memory, half incantation. Then she closes the cupboard like it was never opened. No, not to talk about it. As a child, you once mentioned the word God in school. Your teacher smiled a very tight smile and asked where you heard that. You said, "My babushka." She was summoned for a chat. Afterwards, she didn't speak much for a week. You learned your lesson. Historians still argue whether this silence was fear or simply a form of faith hardened into habit. But some forms of belief can't be silenced. You walk past churches all the time. They're technically preserved, often part of state-run museums or cultural sites. But on holidays, real ones, not the kind with flags and tanks, someone always brings flowers. A woman stands at the gate selling beeswax candles like it's a coincidence. You see people pause, cross themselves quickly, and keep walking, heart pounding. Orthodox Easter is a strange event, officially ignored, unofficially deeply attended. People wake before dawn, form long lines to have baskets of eggs and bread blessed by candlelight. The police often look the other way. Maybe they're believers too, or maybe they just understand that some things are too old to erase. The fringe detail? In some cities, underground baptism ceremonies happen in bathtubs. A priest often defrocked, sometimes in secret whispers the rites. Parents hush crying babies. Neighbors turn up the radio. It's not defiance. It's devotion. Faith in the USSR isn't just about religion. It's layered. There's political faith, of course expected, performed, rewarded. But underneath it runs something deeper, a belief in something beyond the party, beyond the plan, something personal, maybe even eternal. And it's not just Christianity. In Central Asia, Islamic traditions persist quietly. Families still mark Ramadan, though they call it family fasting. In Buryatia and parts of Siberia, shamanic rituals continue under the guise of cultural gatherings. Judaism survives too, tucked into homes, whispered over candles, mourned more than practiced. You once attended a funeral, officially secular. The state provided a speaker who praised the deceased's contributions to collective labor. But after the officials left, the family gathered around the grave and sang a hymn, old words, old tune. One woman wept with her whole body. Another made the sign of the cross with a trembling hand. You pretended not to notice. Faith leaks through. The cracks dot in your own life. You don't go to church. You don't know the full prayers. But when your train stalls in the middle of nowhere during a snowstorm, you whisper, please. When your child is born, you kiss their forehead and say something that feels sacred, even if you don't have a name for it. When your neighbor dies, you bring bread to the family and keep the television off for 3 days. There's a saying, God is far, but the Tsar is near. In the USSR, the Tsar has been replaced with committees, party slogans, and portraits of Lenin. But God, whatever you mean by that, lingers in the quiet moments, in the hush before sunrise, in the hush after loss. Some young people embrace atheism proudly. They join the League of the Militant Godless, attend anti-religion lectures, and scoff at old traditions. But even they often pause during thunderstorms. Even they wear their grandmother's cross on a chain, tucked beneath their pioneer scarf. You find it hard to describe this contradiction. It's not belief, not exactly. It's a cultural rhythm, a way of moving through the world that acknowledges unseen things. You don't light candles in public, but you do in private, and no one asks why. Eventually, some churches reopen, quietly, cautiously, mostly for tourists at first, then for the elderly. Then, one day, a child is baptized publicly again. You hear about it in whispers. Some call it regression, Others call it hope. You walk past a cathedral one evening. The golden dome catches the sunset, flaring briefly like it remembers what it once was. A woman stands near the gate, holding a candle, not for show, not for sale, just holding it. You don't stop, you just watch. And in the soft glow, something stirs, not belief, maybe, but recognition that even in a world of steel and slogans, something older remains, quiet, persistent, unwritten dot and possibly eternal. You start to notice the cracks. They're not in the pavement, those have always been there, nor in the buildings, those have long since crumbled into character. These cracks run deeper, through conversations, through headlines, through the tired eyes of people who've stopped pretending quite so hard, Dot. It's the 1980s now, or close enough. You feel it not in dates, but in atmosphere. The air shifts. The slogans sound hollower. The smiles on the news seem slightly strained, like someone left them out in the sun too long. Even the posters fade faster, Dot. You see it first in the store shelves. They're emptier than usual, and usual was already pretty bare. You line up for bread, and it's not just that there's less, it's that no one believes it'll be better. Next week, the optimism is missing. The babushkas stop gossiping. The jokes become sharper, Dot. People begin to mutter the word deficit shortage with a sort of grim poetry. Not just of food or soap or shoes, but of everything. Time, space, dignity. You hear rumors. A friend of a friend couldn't get baby formula. A professor traded an iron for aspirin. At one point, a man allegedly bartered a rubber boot for a chicken. It's almost funny until you realize it's real. Your neighbor, the usually cheery pensioner who wears suspenders with unmatched socks, shakes his head and says it didn't used to be like this. You ask when it was better. He doesn't answer, just bites into a cold boiled egg and stares out the window. You feel it in the language, too. There are new words whispered over fences glasnost, perestroika. They sound exotic, strange, slightly dangerous. Reform, restructuring, transparency. You don't know what they mean yet, but the fact that they exist is already something. Gorbachev appears on television, talking about change with that famous birthmark on his head and a face that seems uncertain. Not because he lacks resolve, but because he's visibly trying to balance on a collapsing bridge while waving politely. Historians still argue whether his reforms were brave, naive, or a desperate Hail Mary to stop the inevitable. You see tiny rebellions, soft ones, sprouting like moss in a concrete crack. A satirical cartoon sneaks into a magazine. A musician slips an unsanctioned lyric into a concert. A school teacher assigns a banned poem and claims it was a photocopying mistake. Everyone smiles a little too hard, laughs a little too loudly. The youth begin to dress differently. Not wildly, but noticeably. A pin from Poland. A denim jacket, slightly frayed, but still a status symbol. Someone even dyes their hair red. Not Soviet red. Actual red. People stare, but no one reports it. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they've stopped caring. Or maybe, quietly, they're cheering. You see it in the parties. New Year's Eve used to be predictable salad, champagne, patriotic toasts, then a broadcast of the Kremlin chimes. But now the music changes. Someone brings a cassette of Queen. People sing along phonetically. At some point, someone even dares to toast to the future. Not the planned future, just the future. You write a letter to a cousin in Leningrad. You're not sure if it'll be read by someone else before it arrives. You include a joke anyway. There's more food in the official 5-year plan than in my fridge. She writes back, don't worry. The fridge is also part of the plan. Even the official newspapers start to shift. Pravda runs an article about corruption. Not a Western smear, an actual admission. You read it 3 times to be sure. The language is still stiff, but something's changed. There's a hint of accountability, even if it's buried in slogans. People gather more often now, not just in kitchens, but in courtyards, in halls, in parks. Someone reads aloud from a newly published memoir that was once forbidden. A man shares his story of exile. A woman speaks of a brother who disappeared in the 30s. There are tears. No one interrupts. No one takes notes. It feels dangerous and sacred all at once. And then the music arrives. Rock bands start performing with more freedom. You go to a concert where the lyrics are technically legal, but everyone knows what they really mean. The crowd sings every word, fists in the air, swaying like wheat in a storm. It's not just a concert. It's a declaration. Even the television changes. You catch a program discussing alcoholism not as an unfortunate tendency among Westerners, but as a real Soviet crisis. They use statistics. They show hospitals. People talk openly. You blink. You never thought you'd hear honesty on Channel 1. At work. The older workers still pretend nothing's happening. They sip tea, fill out forms, and sigh in the same rhythm. But the younger ones, your generation, they start to ask things. Why do we report numbers we know are false? Why do we make things no one buys? Why do we pretend? The cracks widen. One day the power goes out as usual. But this time, instead of just cursing and waiting, someone lights candles, gathers everyone into a single room, and reads from an old book. Not Marx, not Lenin. A novel, just a novel. You listen. You laugh. You forget the lights were ever on. The state is still there. The speeches, the flags, the police. But the fear has thinned like soup made with too much water. It's still there, but it no longer clings. You walk home under a sky that feels lighter somehow. A man on the trolley bus is humming a Beatles song. A teenager wears a t-shirt that says freedom in crooked English. A child in a sandbox builds a tower, knocks it over, and laughs like it's the funniest thing in the world. Something's coming. You don't know what, but you can feel it. And maybe, just maybe, it won't be planned. It doesn't happen all at once. The collapse isn't a bang. It's a long, slow exhale, like the system itself is finally tired of pretending. You don't wake up one morning to find everything gone. Instead, things begin disappearing in increments, like someone is sneakily removing bricks from the bottom of the house while you're still sitting in the living room, sipping tea. You see it first in the money. Rubles seem to melt in your hand. One day they buy bread. The next, they buy half, a loaf, then just a crumb and a shrug from the woman behind the counter. Prices rise, shelves empty faster, but your salary remains frozen like a winter puddle. The shops stop pretending too. Their windows, once filled with paper cutouts of smiling workers holding wheat, are bare. You peer in to find dusty shelves, flickering lights, and an employee asleep behind the counter. You don't blame her. What else is there to do? People start bartering openly. Soap for sugar, a bicycle for toilet paper, a box of nails for 2 jars of jam. The black market, long the Soviet Union's worst-kept secret, walks confidently into daylight. In one courtyard you see a woman selling individual cigarettes, not even pretending to whisper anymore. Ration cards return, fluttering out of nowhere, like a grim magic trick from the past. Lines grow longer, more desperate. Fights break out not over ideology, but over chicken legs. You hear shouting one morning and look outside to see 2 men arguing over a bag of rice. Neither wins. The bag rips open, spilling into the snow like spilled hope. The ruble collapses. Then, slowly, so does belief. You stop seeing the party posters. Not because they're taken down, but because people stop looking at them. The words blur into wallpaper. Together we will triumph, but no one's listening. The fonts, still bold, but the meaning has gone silent. You watch a speech on TV. Gorbachev, tired, pale, trying to explain the unexplainable. His words feel rehearsed, but his eyes don't. Behind him, the red flag flutters. For now, more republics declare independence. Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, Armenia. The map redraws itself while you're still trying to pay your electric bill. You think, wait, weren't we just one country? Now the borders have borders. The Soviet Union, a colossus for 70 years, begins to unravel like a badly knitted sweater. People whisper less and argue more. You hear conversations about democracy, markets, privatization. Words that once would have earned you a visit from someone are now shouted in kitchens, broadcast on television, printed in newspapers that have finally learned what ink is for. Historians still argue whether the USSR collapsed from economic rot, political mismanagement, or the weight of its own contradictions. But for you, the collapse smells like cheap vodka, feels like standing in a queue for nothing, and sounds like the moment someone says, "It's over." And nobody argues. One day you wake up and the ruble has been replaced by a new currency. You don't understand. Another day, the police uniforms change color. Another, the statue of Lenin in your town square is quietly removed at night. You pass the empty pedestal the next morning. No one mentions it. But everyone notices. The television shows new things, Western things, ads even, bright, fast, loud. You see a commercial for chewing gum with people smiling so hard it hurts your eyes. They wear jeans, eat oranges. You sit in your chair, blinking. It's like someone changed the channel on Reality Dot, and then one winter evening, it happens. You're home, stirring a pot of soup that's mostly water and imagination. The radio crackles, the usual hum of static and song. Then a voice, trembling but official. The Soviet Union has ceased to exist. You freeze, spoon in hand. You glance at your partner. They blink slowly. No one says anything. Then the phone rings. It's your neighbor. She says, "Did you hear?" You reply, "Yes." Then silence. What do you say? Congratulations? Condolences? No one taught you the etiquette for the end of an empire. The next day, things look the same. Buildings still gray. Trams still late. People still tired. But something's missing, like a curtain has fallen on a play that ran too long. And yet you're still here. breathing, waiting. Markets open, prices skyrocket. Foreign brands appear. Marlboros, Snickers, Pepsi, exotic things with exotic prices. The fringe detail? You once saw a man trade a washing machine for a pair of Levi's. He walked away smiling. Your work changes or disappears. Your factory shuts down, reopens, then shuts again. You're told it's being restructured, which sounds like a word someone made up to soften disaster. You sell odds and ends at the local bazaar. Old teacups, a broken radio, a set of curtains you never liked anyway. People adapt. They hustle. They stumble. They grieve, though not always out loud. There are funerals for the old world held over tea and silence. You lose friends, co-workers, illusions. You gain freedom? Maybe. But also confusion. The roadmap is gone, and no one's given you a new one. Some people cheer. Some mourn. Some do both in the same breath. Everyone's a little lost, even the leaders. Even the ones on TV with their shiny new suits and promises about a bright capitalist. Tomorrow. You walk through the city one night. The streets are quiet. A wind picks up, swirling old newspapers around your feet. One headline reads, "New Republic Formed." Another, "Inflation hits record high." You step over both and keep walking. In the distance, you see a child kicking a can. They're laughing, really laughing. And for a moment, you forget the weight. You forget the rubles and the ration cards and the silence that used to press against your spine. You think the union is gone, but I'm still here. You stand in the middle of your apartment, your actual apartment. Not a shared flat. Not a room you borrowed from a cousin. Yours. The walls are still cracked. The floor still creaks. But there's a lock on the door that only you have a key for. And somehow that means more now than it ever did. The Soviet Union is gone. No anthem. No 5-year plan. No party meetings in the community hall. Just silence and the odd, disorienting whir of something new trying to emerge from the rubble. It's not triumphant. It's not tragic. It's just quiet. You brew tea, out of habit more than thirst. The radio hums in the background, flipping between channels that all sound strange now. Some are filled with foreign songs. Others with newscasters who talk about the transition period with wide-eyed optimism that doesn't quite match the bags under their eyes. You stir your tea, counterclockwise. You always have. You don't know why. Outside, the city moves slower than before. Or maybe you just see it differently now. The lines haven't disappeared, they've just changed shape. Now they form outside new Western-style shops, their windows, glittering with goods that were once the stuff of legend. Bananas, chocolate bars, shampoo that smells like flowers instead of tar. You wander through one of those shops eventually. You touch things just to be sure they're real. A can of peaches and syrup, toothpaste that claims to whiten, a jar of peanut butter. You don't buy anything, not today, but you leave with a strange mix of hunger and awe. At home, your shelves hold memories more than things. A pioneer scarf tucked in a drawer, a cracked teacup from your first wedding, a Soviet passport with pages no longer valid. You don't throw them out. You're not sentimental, exactly. But some items feel like ghosts that earn their spot. You meet friends for tea in the kitchen. The samovar is still there, dented but dependable. You talk, cautiously at first about the old days, not with nostalgia, but with a kind of analytical tenderness. You remember the smells, the cues, the school songs, the missing bananas, the unspoken rules. Someone brings up the Lenin statue, the one they took down last spring. It had stood there for decades, hand extended as if hailing a taxi that never arrived. Now there's just a patch of grass and a man selling magazines. You laugh about it, but it's a quiet laugh. Children play in the courtyard. They wear jeans now. Real ones. Some of them even have Game Boys. One kid has a Walkman and plays music that makes no sense to you loud. Chaotic, somehow joyful. You see the grandparents watching too, nodding slowly. Some with approval. Some with confusion. Some with a faraway look, like they're watching a world they once believed they'd never live to see. Or maybe a world they don't entirely recognize. There are new holidays now, new flags, new anthems. You try to learn the words. It's not easy. Your mouth still remembers the old lyrics. Your tongue sometimes trips on the past. But you try. Everyone does in their own way. Historians still argue what it all meant. Whether the Soviet experiment was doomed from the start or sabotaged in the end. Whether its collapse was liberation or tragedy or both. But for you, it was just life. Ordinary, exhausting, peculiar life. You think about the ones who didn't live to see this part. Your grandfather who died clutching a pension book. Your neighbor who always believed in the system, even when it forgot her name. The young soldier who never came back from Afghanistan, his photo still pinned to the stairwell wall. And you think about the things that remain, the language, the sense of humor, the quiet resilience of people who can turn beats into 12 different kneels, the ability to queue for hours without complaint, the belief that nothing good or bad lasts forever. In the evenings, you sit by the window. The city is dim, as always, but the horizon feels different, open, undefined. You no longer know what to expect. And for the first time, maybe that's not terrifying. Maybe it's something else, possibility, or at least the hint of it. You still boil your water. You still wrap leftovers in wax paper. You still iron your shirts more often than necessary, but you also talk more, laugh more. You write things in your journal that don't start with comrade. You dream in color, now sometimes even in English dot, and when you sleep, you don't hear slogans in your head anymore. Just your own breath and silence. Deep old silence. A new world is here. It doesn't look like you imagined. But you're still standing, still waiting, still hoping dot, and that in its own quiet way is enough dot. And now, as the lights in your mind begin to dim, and the echoes of gray hallways and winter winds fade into the distance, let your thoughts drift gently away from the clatter and clamor of history. The cues are gone. The shelves are bare no more. The red flags are folded away, and the statues sleep beneath the soil. You sit now in the hush after everything, the stillness that follows the unraveling of a vast idea. No more parades, no more slogans, just quiet. A kind of peace, maybe. Or maybe just rest dot in the soft flicker of memory. You see faces familiar, half-forgotten, beloved. A neighbor humming a tune. A grandmother lighting a secret candle. A child playing in the snow with a stick for a sword and a tin soldier in their pocket. Breathe slowly. Feel the warmth of a well-worn coat, the weight of a loaf of bread in your arms, the scent of tea steeping in the next room. These are the small things, the things that made it all bearable, the things that stayed. Let them settle now. Let your shoulders release. Let your breath deepen. You're safe. You made it through. The buildings may crumble. The systems may change. But memory stays. And with it, the quiet resilience of those who carried forward one boiled potato, one shared joke, one whispered prayer at a time. Close your eyes now. Let the snow fall softly outside. Let the kettle sigh. Let the old songs loan themselves back into silence. History sleeps too. Now. And so should you. Sweet dreams.